letting you. Thank you, Christine. Okay. Some people in here. So you're doing the let-ins. Okay, we're going to get started. We want to stay on task and we want to stay with, our time frame. So welcome everyone to the South Coast Food Policy Council's advocacy training. We are so excited to have you here today, and we are especially excited to be joined by Becker Miller, who I will introduce in a moment. But what we'll be doing is we'll want everybody to stay on mute so that we don't get any background noise. We also ask that if you have questions along the way, that go ahead and put them in the chat. If they are questions that we need to interrupt and get to right away, we'll try to do that. But for the most part, we'll also hang on to any questions that can be answered during our Q&A period. So there will be time during a Q&A for that. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Liz Wiley, and I'm the Executive Director of the Marion Institute. The South Coast Food Policy Council is a program of the Marion Institute, and it's our newest program. We launched it in early 2019. I'm also joined today by my teammate, Christine Smith, who is the program manager for the South Coast Food Policy Council. And we're also joined by many of our community advisory board members, which are our CAB members that are members of the Food Policy Council, and some of our working group members. So those of you that are part of SFPC, thank you for joining. And those of you that are joining us new, we are so happy to welcome you to our community. Okay, Christine, any other business I needed to do before I introduce Becca?
I would just ask you again to mute yourselves, use the chat, and you can put in your organizational name and your pronouns into your name if you haven't yet. Thank you.
Great. All right, so we're joined by Becker Miller today. She's a program manager for the Food System Collaborative. And those of you that don't know the Massachusetts Food System Collaborative, it was founded in December of 2015, just after they completed the Massachusetts Local Food Action Plan. The collaborative works toward policy change and contributes to a more equitable, sustainable, and resilient food system by building broad support for advocacy campaigns and providing training and other resources to allow partners participate effectively. They've been incredible as far as being a leader that has been bringing the food policy councils within Massachusetts together, and have been really helpful to us in our, as we emerge as a food policy council. Becker is a program manager there, and she manages the Campaign for Healthy Incentives program, the HIP funding. She co-facilitates a coalition of urban agricultural stakeholders that was formed during the pandemic to build relationship and share skills, and manages a 2022 elections engagement project. And we'll be working on new grassroots policy advocacy training project in the coming months. She's happy to clarify the mysteries of Beacon Hill for us today. And we're really excited to have her working with us and here with us. So Becca, I am going to turn it over to you and let you demystify Beacon Hill for us.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Liz and Christine. I really appreciate it. Hey everyone, my name is Becca and I'm happy to be here with you all today. It's really nice to see some faces, even if it is virtual. I hope that we'll be together sometime soon in person. Can y'all see this? Is this full screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So we're gonna do a quick policy advocacy 101 training today. Again, I'm a program manager at the Massachusetts Food System Collaborative. This is my email, which I'll put in the chat at the end of the presentation. I'm happy to be in touch anytime. So again, we're going to do about 50 minutes of an advocacy presentation, then about 20 minutes for a question and answer. Then we're going to actually do some practice activities of advocating together, and then we'll share some announcements at the end. So as Liz and Christine said, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. I personally would love to hear, in addition to your name, pronouns, and organizational affiliation, if you have one thing that scares you about advocacy. If folks want to come off mute, you're welcome to. But I would love to hear what is making you nervous about taking this on, what scares you. That just helps me make this presentation as useful to you as possible.
I'm always afraid that I won't have enough information as I engage people to understand what I'm advocating. Even though I try to go into every conversation as knowledgeable as possible, I just, I'm always afraid I don't have enough information.
Got it. That's super helpful to know. Thank you. And that's something we'll talk about a little bit later. Anyone else?
So I just recently did a little advocating for myself with Patrick O'Connor, and that part wasn't scary. It was reaching out to somebody, talking to them about the problem that you were having. I think the harder part on my end is seeing the follow through and making sure that someone who's not familiar with legislation, how to have legislation written the way that you would hopefully have it intended to be written, and not, if that makes sense, in terms of being able to advocate for yourself, but then actually have what you have envisioned actually becoming a reality. So that's something I would like to have some help with.
That makes sense. Yeah. And I think Lisa's raising her hand, and then I think we can move on.
Yes, I just have one comment, and this is really esoteric. I used to be in a state position where there were very clear lines drawn about what we were allowed to do and not allowed to do regarding interacting with our legislators.
Yep,
and
yep.
Now that I'm working in a nonprofit organization, I'm not always sure where those boundaries are.
Yep. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, the distinctions between lobbying and advocacy. And it's definitely a common concern I hear. So thank you for raising that. All right.
Thank you
to you three. I really appreciate you taking a spin and coming off of mute. So folks, feel free to continue to introduce yourself in the chat. I think that we'll cover all three of those points raised, but if we don't, feel free to email me or we'll talk about them in the questions and answers. So first of all, like, what are we talking about when we talk about policy? The too long don't read for the slide is to think about policy like a set of rules or a set of ways that like bound our societies. Like they outline what a government body should and should not do. There are things that guide government programs, government spending and activities. I think a lot of folks will have heard this by now. There's a line that some folks use in various advocacy spaces that a budget is a moral document. Most policies are actually expressing government values in one way or another. You can see them in regulations, budgets, and other measures that prescribe steps that will like enforce. So banning something, regulating it, supporting something either with funding or creating new institutions, or promoting those values through like educational campaigns like PSAs or programs that promote, new values. So like Summer Eats. Policy does shape the playing field. It can either enforce the status quo or create new ways to support equity. So you can either, design a policy with equity in mind, or a policy can continue to enforce the status quo. It can be proactive and move us toward a goal. So like the climate roadmap bill that passed in 2021. So that's a goal to move towards 2050, or it can be reactive, trying to avoid an outcome. So we can pass a policy trying to avoid chemical spills that lead to Superfund sites, for example. So in Massachusetts, there are three broad buckets of policy. The state constitution is the highest form of policy that we have. It lays out the rights of citizens and the structure of the government for the Commonwealth, and our overall values. It is a pretty lengthy document, but it is there for folks to like see the outline of the state body government. Then there are the general laws, which are the statutes that describe programs, practices that the state government has that will uphold the values expressed in the Constitution. And then we have regulations, which are how the state agencies actually administer those general laws, including the programs or regulate the practices expressed in the laws written by government agencies to implement legislation. So we see often.
Can we ask everybody to make sure you're muted, please? Please mute.
All right, well, sorry about that. But yes, as there are new rules created, so For example, you'll see new pesticides come into the market. Sometimes those are regulated by the government, depending on how strong they are. The general public is invited to provide feedback on drafts through public comment periods. You'll see these posted by state agencies, and you can have an opportunity to share feedback if you want to like make something more specific, change the way that it's going to be regulated, etc. So in Massachusetts, again, there's a couple levels of government. There are the state agencies, there's a legislature, there's and also municipalities. So in general, municipalities are responsible for passing local ordinances, maintaining positive revenue, and they have a variety of structures. So some towns you'll see selectmen, select people. Some towns will have a town or a city manager, and then some cities have mayors and city councilors. It depends. They're all like very valid forms of government that have the same level of responsibilities under the state constitution. And then we have the legislature, which is another layer of state government. And then similarly to municipalities, they're responsible for creating state laws, making changes to existing laws, and passing a balanced annual budget, which we'll get into shortly. But when we say the legislature, like, what does it actually mean? Like, who are we actually talking about? So the legislature is made up of two bodies, similar to federal legislature. You have the House and the Senate. In Massachusetts, there are 160 representatives. So the districts are pretty small. They're about 40,000 people. So there's 160 of them. You can find them online pretty easily. And leadership is made up of Speaker of the House. If folks are tuned in, you can put who you think is the Speaker of the House if you know it in the chat. There's also the House Ways and Means Committee Chair. That is the budget committee that handles the money. And there's many more. In the Senate, there are less senators because their districts are a lot larger. There's about 40 of them, and their leadership is similar. So you have the Senate President, you have the Senate Ways and Means Committee Chair, and you have others like various like district leaders that hold leadership positions. So these are folks that are elected every 2 years, and they're pretty reachable. And so in state government, we also have the administration. So who are we talking about when we say the administration? Generally, we're speaking about the governor, the lieutenant governor, and then we have the executive offices. So those are several, those executive offices oversee several state agencies in a given area. So we have Energy and Environmental Affairs, which oversees the State Department of Agricultural Resources, DEP, and a bunch of other folks that I'm not going to mention now due to lack of time. And they have secretaries that are appointed by the governor that oversee those executive offices, and they also have staff. And then within those executive offices, you have state agencies. So the Department of Agricultural Resources is in EEA. And we also have the commissioner of the Department of Agricultural Resources and their staff that support their various programs, policies, and initiatives. So we have like a lot of grant programs that farmers take advantage of. We have the Urban Agricultural Program that Rosa Ruda works on. We have the variety of market programs that David Weber works on. Generally speaking, staff of state agencies are really reachable and are there to support the work that folks are doing. So what do we actually like mean when we want to get a bill passed in Massachusetts? So this is a very, very kind of like stripped down version of passing a law in Massachusetts. There are a lot of caveats in this that I'm not really going to go into, but basically, if you want to get a bill passed in Massachusetts, you have an idea. I would talk to my state representative first, talk to them about why it's important to me, and then write a bill with them to get them to sponsor it. Then, they will propose it, and other members of the legislature's chamber will sign on in support as what's called co-sponsors. So like the person who originally sponsors the bill is the sponsor, and then the other people who sign on in support are co-sponsors. And then the bill is going to be assigned to a committee that works on issues related to those addressed in the bill. So if your bill is related to making sure folks have enough healthy food to eat, you'll probably see it assigned to public health. And if those committees are then required to hold a hearing on the bills that get assigned to them. So a public hearing provides an opportunity for input. You can usually provide input in both oral, like testifying in person, or during the pandemic, a lot of hearings were held virtually, or just by writing a letter and sending it in. Committees can take testimony that's in a written format at any time. It doesn't have to be during the hearing. And then the committee, after holding that hearing, will decide whether to move the bill, reject the bill, or you'll see often a lot of bills are sent what's called to study, which essentially like delays the bill. If it does pass out of that first committee, it's often referred to a second committee for its consideration. Often bills are under multiple subject matters of various committees in the legislature. Then you'll see changes that are considered. The second committee will again go through the same process of debating the bill, propose any changes or amendments, and either approve or reject the revised version. Once that happens, then you'll see a bill move to the full chamber. So if it originally started in the House, you'll see it voted on in the House. If it started in the Senate, then it's voted on in the Senate. If it's approved in that chamber, then it's sent to the other chamber for consideration and approval. If there are any differences in between the House and Senate versions of that bill, then those have to be worked out in what's called a conference committee, where you several legislators from each chamber are chosen to work those differences out. You see this often with like large spending bills, especially. And then the governor will sign or veto the bill. So he can often approve the bill, but veto line items. He can propose changes. He can return it to the legislature. But ultimately the bill will pass after the governor signs it. So this is very broad. There are definitely a little bit of twists and turns that a bill can take depending on how complex it is. There are many additional steps that bills sometimes take if they're really large packages. But if they're bills that are facing like some urgent deadlines, such as some of the bills that you've seen recently, after certain federal decisions were made, those can move much more quickly. All right, and now since you've heard me talk for about 20 minutes, we're gonna just take a couple minutes to watch just a quick fun video that I think should be nostalgic for some folks. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a very good illustration, in my opinion, of how a bill becomes a law that I just wanted to share. We're just gonna watch like 1 minute of it.
Whew, you sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee, but I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will, but today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." And he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. I hope and pray that they will, but today I am still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, but it looks like I'm gonna live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what happens?
Then I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all over again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well, then I'm off to the White House where I wait in our line with a lot of other bills for the president to sign. And if he signs me, then I'll be alone. How I hope and pray that he will. But today I am still just a bill.
You mean even if the whole Congress says you should be a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again, and by that time you're so
By
old.
that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but how I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill. He signed your bill. Now you're a law. Oh, yes.
Okay, I hope that was helpful for folks. I know that was a trip down memory lane for me. And I just really love that video. Honestly, it's so cute. That is technically the federal process, but it's also very, very similar to the Massachusetts state process. The governor can also veto a bill. There are about 4,000 to 5,000 bills that are filed in a given session. Not as many are passed into law. So you do see some bills that are sent to study to be effectively killed for a session, or some that like make it through all the way, but just aren't voted on by the time that formal session ends. So they have to be reintroduced the next session. All right, sorry about that. So moving on from bills, there's another really, well, the budget is a bill, but it's another piece of the policy advocacy process. So in Massachusetts, we have an annual state operating budget. That process is pretty long and there's a lot of different opportunities for advocacy along the road. In the fall, you'll see departments, so like the commissioners of departments talk to the secretaries of executive offices, who then talk to what's called the Administration and Finance Office of the governor's administration. So they all talk to each other and they submit their budget requests to the governor for what they view as like their needs for staffing, program support, like any capital needs that they have. Those then get processed and looked over by the governor and the executive offices. And then by early January, the governor proposes a budget. Once that's proposed, the House and Senate get to review it. The House will then convene its Committee on Ways and Means, which is, again, the Budget Committee. They'll hold public hearings on the governor's budget, ask them questions on like why something is receiving increased funding, some line item is receiving the same amount of funding, why it could be getting decreased funding. And then once they have all of those hearings on the many aspects of the budget, they will draft their own budget proposal that may be very different, may be very similar to the governor's proposal. Once that budget proposal is written out, the committee will release its budget proposal to the full House. Members get the chance to review it. They get the chance to offer amendments. So this can be for programs that are district level. So if a member wants to support a organization doing good work in their district, they'll often offer amendments to support that organization. Sometimes you'll see folks try and get legislation passed in the budget, depending on the member's priority. There's a lot of different amendments that are filed. There's usually, I think, more than 1,000 in the House. And then once those amendments are filed, after like about a week or so, the House will debate the budget and the amendments that have been filed over the next week in April. And then they'll vote on like large packages of amendments. Sometimes you'll see them vote on individual amendments. And then once that process is done, once they've gone through all the amendments, once they've edited that budget that they see fit, they will pass it on, and then the process kind of repeats in the Senate, So the Senate Ways and Means Committee will hold hearings. They will then draft their own budget proposal. They will release it to the full Senate to review in June. And then members again do the similar thing of offering amendments. If a representative and a senator have a organization they both want to support that's in their districts, it's overlapping, You'll often see them file similar amendments in both chamber to increase the likelihood that that will be incorporated in the final budget. And then you'll see debate happen once the amendments are filed and each amendment is discussed, and then the full body will vote up and down on the process. So once the Senate passes its budget, the Senate appoints 3 members and the House appoints 3 members of leadership. So you usually see the Ways and Means Committee chair, the vice chair, and a member of the minority party in each chamber appointed to what's called a conference committee. Similar to bills, the budget is a very large, complex bill, and so this conference committee is formed to reconcile the differences between the Senate and House budgets, and they propose a joint budget for both chambers to vote on. This actually is not amended. This says June also, but this is actually where we are right now in the budget process. I know it's July, but we still have not seen the conference committee budget, so the governor has proposed and the House and Senate passed, I believe right before July 1st, what's called a continuing budget that just funded the continuance of the government functions for the month of July because they're still debating the differences in between the House and Senate budgets. So that's why you see this asterisk by June 30th, the governor has to sign veto parts of the budget. That continuing budget gives him until the end of July. So there's a lot of work that's still being done behind closed doors. This is an opportunity, conference committee, you can't like vote to amend, but once the budget gets passed to the governor, there is an opportunity to advocate to his office to make sure that, if there's something proposed in the conference committee that gets included in his final budget, he doesn't like veto that specific part. That's just a nice way to wrap up budget advocacy. And every step along this way in the budget, I'm just gonna go back for a minute. So every step along this way has an opportunity to advocate. You can write to your representatives when they are voting on the full proposal and offering amendments. The nice thing about the budget process is that you can do it like remotely, like you can send emails. There's no like hearings like you will have with a bill that you have to be at the State House or have to log into Zoom at a specific time. You can write to the House Committee on Ways and Means in March. You can write to the Senate Ways and Means Committee in May when they're talking about their budget proposal. Then you can write to your Senate member in June. So lots of opportunity for advocacy there. So one question I have for you all is, again, feel free to come off mute. They'll try not to speak over one another. Why do you want to be a policy advocate now that you know a little bit more about like the mysteries of Beacon Hill, what happens on Beacon Hill? Why are you here? What do you want to do? What do you want to advocate for? And feel free to put that in the chat as well if that's yes, or raise hands as Liz is saying in the chat. Food access in general, yeah, that's a great reason. All right, no need to be shy. Increased funding for SNAP, that's a great one, yeah. More money for HIP, yep. I know I'm biased, but I do love to hear that. Equitable food access, yes, very important. Systems change, having more heft behind what we want, yep, so building power. Sarah?
Sarah, you want? Yeah.
Hi there. Sorry about that, folks. My dog is starting to go crazy right now. I am so interested in this, being a recipient myself of SNAP and HIP and some of the food policy programs that are out there, to continue to be a voice for the voiceless, those that can't speak up, those that can't go and advocate for it, because by golly, that's about all I have left is my voice. So I want to use that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it so much. And your voice is very powerful. And I want to encourage folks to really use their voices throughout this process. And that's going to be a recurring theme today. All right, just a couple more in the chat. Demystifying the process. Yep, that's a big one for me. Staff support to new municipal committees, improving food safety, increasing accessibility to food resources, i.e. less required documentation, advocating for farmers' needs. These are all really great. Thanks, y'all. And I'm just going to add one more because you actually can create change. I know that like it's kind of hard to envision change when the process can be quite mysterious, but you actually can create change. And if there's one thing that you remember from this presentation, I hope it's this, that you, specifically you, listening to me talk about this, can create change. Awesome. Thank you for putting these in the chat, folks. This is awesome. So what do I mean when I say advocacy? These next two slides are going to be a little bit technical, and feel free to put questions in the chat, but this is important as some folks were asking earlier about what's allowable versus what is not allowable. So advocacy, technically speaking, in a legal manner, though I am not a lawyer, there are many legal resources out there that I'm happy to link in this presentation after. Advocacy is explaining and promoting an idea, cause, or organization. So if you're advocating, you're saying like, I really like farmers markets, or I really think food pantries are great. You can identify a problem to solve and develop an ask, sign on to another organization's campaign, or engage in other ways. Those are advocacy. Versus lobbying. Lobbying is a specific position on a piece of federal, state, or local legislation. For example, asking your legislators to vote yes on a HIP budget amendment to increase funding to the program. That's a specific position. You want them to vote yes. You do not want them to vote no. I know that this is often a concern for nonprofit organizations specifically. Generally speaking, if you're a nonprofit organization with a 501c3 IRS status, or if you work at an organization with a 501c3 status, you are allowed to participate in lobbying activities as long as they don't represent a substantial part of your overall work. The IRS defines that more specifically on their website, but that, generally speaking, is no more than 20% of your organization's activities based on expenditures. So if you're sending like a couple emails a month, that's like, I mean, not 20% of your time, right? Like you can do this. This is something that you can engage in. Generally speaking, if you're a public employee, so if you're a state or a municipal employee, there are specific guidelines on how to do that. Generally, I'd recommend that you should like not use your public email address. You should reach out to like state legislators on your own time. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm happy to link the statute that is covered under in this presentation. Basically, like the way that we're going to talk about advocacy in the next, say, half an hour, some of this will be defined as lobbying. I'm happy to make that more specific where it's relevant, but you should not be afraid to engage in making your voice heard, just because like there are some regulations. Do be aware of them, but you are allowed to participate. You should participate. Your expertise and your voice is really needed. So again, I'm going to say advocacy here, but some of these are technically lobbying. So asking for a meeting with a decision maker. So if you're trying to get a bill passed, then maybe that's a legislator, maybe that's a senator, writing and sending an email, making a phone call, either speaking with someone, either a legislator or someone on their staff, or leaving a voicemail if they don't pick up, sharing an advocacy ask in your newsletters, asking your neighbors to write into decision makers. You know, old-fashioned door knocking is really effective. That does, there are ways to do that safely during a pandemic, as we're still in the pandemic. And finally, posting an ask on your social media and tagging your legislators. Legislators are active, like the rest of us probably are, too much personally, on social media, and tagging them in is a way to like make sure that that's visible. Folks who may not know what tagging them in means, like linking directly to their page on like a social media post so that they get the notification that you're asking them to do something. So again, all of those advocacy pieces can be done at various times during a legislative session. Each one is 2 years long, so I'm using the most recent session as an example here. So you can do any of those. I'm just going to go back. Any of these steps at any of these points, depending on like what your goal is. So you can, you know, ask legislators to sign on to a bill when you're introducing legislation. So the first couple of months of a legislative session, are the time of session, excuse me, for when legislation is actually like written and introduced. However, you can introduce bills late. They just have like a special note attached to them. After the first year of a session, you'll see a deadline for a bill to move out of its first committee. It's called this very obscure term called Joint Rule 10 Day. There's actually a public calendar that's on the legislature's website that you can see all of these dates on. But generally speaking, the early February of the second year of a legislative session is the deadline for a bill to move out of its first committee. That also has an asterisk on it because sometimes there are extensions to deadlines for bills to move out of committee. Especially during the pandemic, there was a lot of like variety of public health concerns that took precedent over other bills. So you saw like a lot of them get extensions. July 31st in the second year of a session is the end of the formal session. So this month we'll see a rush of activity both on the budget and some other bills that folks are working on. There is what's called an informal session for like what's basically like the fall of the second year of a legislative session, but it's called an informal session because very few bills will get passed during that time. If any legislator like raises a concern with a bill, it just won't pass because most legislators aren't like in the chamber. So this is like the end of this month is really like the time that most bills are facing a big deadline to like move by. And then again, so variety of committees will have a variety of hearings for bills. Usually they will be in the late summer, fall, winter of that first year of session. And then votes will be taken at a variety of time throughout the 2 years of a session. Sometimes you'll see bills that almost made it through in a previous session be like one of the first things that the House and Senate take up in the next session. So again, the climate roadmap bill was one of those. It was passed very early this session. That's kind of unusual. And then again, as I talked about earlier, the budget process is generally speaking in the spring of a given year. That is both years of a legislative session. And so now that you know like all of these variety of times that you can advocate, variety of ways that you can advocate, if you have something that you think is really important to your work, how do you make that more widely known in your organization? So at the organizational level, what I would recommend is making sure that your colleagues know why this campaign or an ask that you're sharing from another organization that's doing advocacy work is important to the work that you're all doing at the organization and how it would affect the organization. If this is like sharing an ask from another advocacy group, you can often ask them for more information. Engage, if you're a membership organization, engage your membership in the question of like how this legislation or say budget would impact them. Engage partner organizations that you work with. So for example, maybe some members of your food policy council would be interested in something that's coming up. Or if you're a social service agency, share how this would affect your clients, and definitely engage with your colleagues, build support, make sure it's very easy to comprehend, and then ask your director if they would be comfortable signing on as an organization. I recognize that there may be some program managers in the audience or directors that are also in the audience, and I strongly recommend that it's not just like one person at the organization that has the knowledge of why advocacy is important. I think it's really important for an organization overall to understand legislation and like what it's supporting. So definitely share that just beyond like either executive level staff, program managers. It's really important for everyone to get involved. And so again, if you're getting like if you are an organization, you have gotten this buy-in, so you're signed on to an advocacy campaign, and you get like a call to action, maybe from the South Coast Food Policy Council about something going on, either in the budget or there's a hearing coming up for a bill. First of all, this is what I try and do. I try and make like toolkits to make it very easy for folks to understand like what's happening, why it's important to respond, who the decision makers are. So the first step for me is to figure out who my legislators are that I should be reaching out to. So again, you'll receive this presentation after. But this is like on the legislature's website. You can just use it. You can put in your address, you find your legislator. So that's your state representative and senator. And then I always say make a phone call first. It's really not that scary. I know I'm a millennial, but I prefer to make phone calls at this point rather than texting. And even if you receive a staffer, that's still a really important way to like reach your legislator. Staffers are honestly like, they're the best. They handle a lot of work for legislators, from constituent services to policy development, depends on the office, what they're assigned to. But they will keep their legislators aware of what their constituents are reaching out to them about. That's really important for legislators to hear, like what's going on the ground. They're not like, always out in the streets, walking the neighborhood, knocking doors. They are in the state house some time of year, so they need to know what their constituents are concerned about. And then if you don't, if you get a voicemail, that's also fine. If you get a voicemail, or even if you talk to someone, I would send an email to follow up so they have that in writing, that you're that this issue is important to you, that you want them to behave in a certain way on it. You can also post and tag them in on a social media post, like I was saying earlier. I definitely recommend, if you're going to post on social media, using a photo. It's just really great way to demonstrate an impact of a program with HIP. We often tag in photos of folks at farmers markets. We've often asked folks to share photos of themselves, making meals out of the produce they were able to buy with HIP if they're comfortable. Just illustrating the impact that a program has is really powerful. Folks have access to a lot of data, but sharing like an image that goes along with that really helps it stick in their minds. We've heard from folks that really works. And what's most important.
I'm sorry, Becca, do you use a hashtag when you use those at all? Sorry.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I use a hashtag. For folks who might not be aware, a hashtag is like it's a symbol that looks like this on social media that you like tag in, or like create like a slogan for your campaign. For the campaign for HIP, we use hashtag HIPworks. And there are also some hashtags that like legislators or like political people often use, which are hashtag MAPOLI, that's MAPOLI, or hashtag MALEG. That if you're on like the social media platform Twitter, you can actually like subscribe to a hashtag, which is a weird function, but generally speaking, those get seen by political people, and are also a way to amplify your post. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate it, Sarah.
So that was HIP work,
Yep.
MAPOLI, and then MALEG, like
Yep.
legislation.
Yeah, I will put them in the chat now.
Okay, cool. Oh, great, thanks.
Mm-hmm. And so if you're also going to be posting on social media, or like in any of these tactics to respond to a call to action, what's most important is sharing your unique story. So like why you specifically support a piece of legislation, or like want a legislator to do a specific thing. Again, legislators have a lot of data. They have access to state agencies that can provide them that data. But sharing your unique story and sharing and like amplifying your own voice is really powerful. And that's really, really important to do. Again, there's like a method to doing this. Like I would generally recommend like, hi, my name is your name. Then like saying like what position you have, and then saying like why you support, say, the HIP budget amendment, and like what this would mean to you and your community. Again, like if it doesn't need to be like a sharing your story in a traumatic way, I think it can be in like a way that feels appropriate and comfortable to you, but definitely sharing like what impact a program or a budget amendment or a piece of legislation would have in your life is really important. And so when we're thinking about reaching out to legislators, I generally encourage folks to reach out to them as people. I know it can be a little bit intimidating to reach out to an elected official, but it's really important to remember that, yes, they are people too. Yes, they do need to hear from their constituents. Yes, they are voted into office every 2 years, and that's really important as we are in an election year. So first of all, when we're thinking about either responding to a call to action or creating a call to action of our own, we need to think about how the policymaker has acted on related issues. So if they've signed on to budget amendments that are similar to a budget amendment you're proposing in the past, you can bring that up. Are there other, important pieces of legislation being considered that relate to your ask? Does your proposal have a cost? How could that cost be offset or, funded? Does your issue affect this policymaker's constituents, and how? What other policymakers are likely to support your position? And what other questions might the policymaker or staff have? These are all just questions to keep in mind when you're reaching out to a legislator to ask them to either support something or discuss an idea you have for a bill. You don't have to have the answer to all of these at one time. You can always say, like, I'm not 100% sure on that. I will get back to you after I look it up. It's way better to do that than try and make something up on the spot and then be wrong. That's not something I would ever recommend. And it's totally okay to not have all of the answers. Like, I think someone was asking earlier about not enough info. If you're responding to an advocacy ask from an organization, I would say you can always reach out to that organization and ask them for more information. Or if you are trying to, advocate for your own organization, then you can always, get back to someone later after touching back about the issue with your team. That's totally fine. That's also a great way to follow up. And so when you're, in a meeting, making an ask of a legislator, or, making the ask virtually in an email, it's generally great to demonstrate the need for the ask. So if it's a budget amendment, say we need this to fund X, Y, and Z. Maybe you're asking for funding to help start a new program at your farm or your farmer's market. Demonstrate the ease of the ask and demonstrate credibility. So why you are the person that should be listened to on this area. Make it very clear, make it very specific. So we're asking for a budget amendment for our organization to fund this program that does X, Y, and Z. And it's directed at the appropriate agency or governing body. So if you have feedback on, say, a new regulation proposed by the Department of Transitional Assistance regarding SNAP benefits, then you probably wouldn't send that to a legislator unless you're asking them to amplify your ask to DTA. You probably want to send that into DTA when they have the regulations feedback period. And one important part of making an ask is to build relationship with allies. So again, those are folks that we talked about earlier. So members of your organization, clients, partner organizations of a policy council or a coalition that you're a part of, that can also make the ask and further lend credibility to your work. I apologize if allergies and they're not great.
Echo, I have a question, so you can pause, have a drink. So we have Nick Owen from ABCD, and he asked, is blending qualitative and quantitative examples when advocating advised for maximum impact?
Yeah, so qualitative and quantitative, yes, definitely. That's basically what I was trying to say, just in a less formal version. So qualitative and quantitative, so data and your stories. Yes, totally agree with that. And if you, I would say that you can also reference previous studies or campaigns that have demonstrated a need for a similar ask. So if you are trying to get, say, additional funding for SNAP, there's a lot of research already out there about the level of SNAP benefits being maybe too low. And I don't think that you need to really do another study to demonstrate that. That's been very clearly defined in multiple studies over the years. And you can share that study with a legislator. So yeah, and also including your own story and how that has affected you will be maximally impactful.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that.
Yeah, happy to. And thanks. I think there's a lot of folks from ABCD here today. This is awesome. So again, this is the basis of creating a campaign. Once you've identified an issue and created an ask, this is also a really effective way to respond to a call to action. So when you're responding to a call to action, you should also be making the ask to the decision maker, either a legislator, a governing body. And that is like, really important to be clear, concise, credible, and specific. And again, continuing on with our theme of relationship building, there are a variety of ways to meet with legislators. They are, available. The smaller the office, the more available, I would generally say. So like your city councilors have smaller districts than your state legislators. Your state legislators have smaller districts than your congresspeople. So when we're talking about state legislators, there's a lot of opportunities to engage them, both at briefings. So sometimes for my organization, the collaborative will have briefings for folks. Over the past couple of years, they've been virtual, which makes it even easier for offices to send staff or legislators themselves to attend. We'll also have lobby days at the State House. So we invite folks, again, I'm just going to reference the campaign for HIP funding because that's my work. We'll invite folks from across the state to come to the State House for lobby days where we knock every legislator's door. We have drop-in meetings with them, and then we schedule some meetings depending on the legislator's availability. You can also invite legislators out to your offices, to your farm, your farmer's market, etc., to do like a one-on-one meeting. Legislators will often also have office hours, or you can encourage them to have office hours. And then, like I was saying, during lobby day, you can just drop in, knock their door at the State House. Sometimes they will be in session, especially on Tuesdays and Thursdays of a given week during the formal session. But if you're a constituent, you should at least be able to meet with a staffer. And so once you've like scheduled a meeting, these are just generally some tips to like make sure that your meeting goes well according to plan. So generally just be on time, know the names and positions of people you're meeting with, know their titles, have a handout to leave behind that clearly states your ask, states facts that support your ask, and include your contact info. This will seem pretty straightforward, but you can, if you somehow forget to like have a handout, you can also email it to folks. Ask them generally how familiar they are with an issue, so you know how much background information to give. If they've prepped for the meeting, then you don't really need to spend a ton of time refreshing their knowledge on it. Don't just read from a handout in the meeting. Again, share your story about what the proposal will mean to you and the people in the district. Again, qualitative plus quantitative equals maximal impact. I'm just going to make that my next slide, and ask them directly whether or not they support your position. So this is called making the hard ask. You want to get them on the record in this meeting with you if they are going to say yes or no to this position. If they do, thank them and ask them what you can do to help get their colleagues on board. Usually they'll it's best to like also engage folks in colleagues' districts. And if not, you can ask them what their concerns are, how you can alleviate those, what other questions they have about the bill. Again, if at any point during a meeting you run into a question that you don't have enough information to answer, do not make something up. Just go back and like check with either the advocacy campaign that you're a part of, or if it's related to your organization specifically with your team about that question, and then come back, and that's totally fine. And so after a meeting, you've breathed, you've met with the legislator, you have successfully made the ask. It is the number one thing to make sure that you do after a meeting with a legislator is to follow up. I cannot stress this enough, just like sending a thank you email for taking the time to meet with you has a huge impact, just helps build that relationship, helps keep you in contact. You shouldn't just be reaching out to legislators when you have an ask for them. You should just be trying to maintain contact with them regularly. So like sending them thank yous. They're people too, they like to get thanked. And again, remember that they work for you. They're there to make sure that your concerns are met, that they're getting work passed, they're funding things in the district, so that you can just continue to invite them out to either meetings in the district, or you can keep going to the State House or meet with them virtually. So I have about 5 minutes left, so I'm just going to go through some campaigns that the collaborative runs really quickly. Again, I help facilitate the campaign for HIP funding. So HIP is a extra benefit that folks who receive SNAP get in Massachusetts. So our ask is to operate year-round without interruption, reach new SNAP households, and add new farmers so that the program equitably reaches more SNAP clients. We advocated for $20 million in this year's budget. We don't know what we're getting yet, but we're getting at least $18 million, so that's great. And we also have a bill that would enact the program into law permanently, as it only exists in regulations right now. Happy to talk about that more during the questions period, and there's our website. The Ag Equity Network is made up of and led by Massachusetts farmers who identify as BIPOC. My colleague Norris Guscott runs this network of folks. They have created and proposed this bill and act promoting equity in agriculture, which would create a commission of BIPOC stakeholders to review policy recommendations, resource and program accessibility of current programs, and recommendations related to equity in existing laws and regulations. That's a relatively new project of ours that we're really excited about, and I'm happy to put Norris's email into the presentation if anyone wants to reach out to him about that. Elections is another one of my projects. We're partnering with other food system organizations around Massachusetts during the election cycle this year to educate state level candidates for representative, senator, and governor or lieutenant governor about issues facing the local food system. We've sent a questionnaire to all state senate and state representative candidates in competitive races, so not just like an incumbent. And so far we've received more than 30 responses from candidates. I'll link to our webpage with that in this presentation as well. If you're interested in working on this with me, like inviting a candidate for public office out to your organization, I'd love to partner with you on this, so feel free to reach out to me. Food waste, this network is led by my colleague Brittany Peets, who some of you I think know. She facilitates this network of organizations that help reduce wasted food in Massachusetts. They're advocating for these three bills this session. They've been meeting roughly like once a quarter to share information and build relationships across the sector. And Brittany also leads the food system literacy campaign. She's wrote and published this report on food literacy in Massachusetts. So basically a snapshot of the current system, and is going to be working to pull together a coalition of teachers, educators, school administrators, parents, and more to expand food system education. They're thinking about legislation for next session and next steps. So I will put her contact information and how to get involved with that work in this presentation. And I didn't put this in here, but the collaborative also runs a facilitates a network of local food policy councils that, again, is Brittany Peets' work that I think the South Coast Food Policy Council mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, that I think is really exciting because y'all have been doing some awesome work. And I also wanted to shout out some additional state level campaigns for universal school meals run by Project Bread, closing the SNAP gap. So making sure that everyone who's eligible to receive SNAP actually does receive SNAP. That's spearheaded by Mass Law Reform Institute. The Hunger Free Campus Coalition is run by a lot of different folks, and that's making sure that folks on campus have access to both public benefits and campuses themselves are reducing food insecurity. Mass Farm to School has been advocating for many years to increase farm to school grants and make that more of a statewide program. The Food Trust is spearheaded by MPHA and some of the lenders. So that would create new food retail in low access and low income communities across the state. Lift Our Kids is again a pretty large coalition of folks that are working to increase TAFDC or temporary assistance to families with dependent children grants that are really, really low right now. And then NOFA Mass has, or the Northeast Organic Farmers Association of Massachusetts, one of our partners. They have a lot of different campaigns, but their priority bills this year that are still working their way through the legislature are around pesticides. There are about 3 of them that are on their website. So just wanted to shout out, there's a really wide diversity of issues that are being campaigned on that relate to the food system and that food system organizations have organized around. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. I think some food system organizations have also signed on to the Fair Share Amendment, which folks may have heard about, but just wanted to shout out the work that's going on across the state on these. All right, so that's it for me. I wanted to shout out Liz and Christine again for their time and allowing me to take this time, but I think we're going to take the next 15 minutes for questions. Is that right?
Okay, so I have a question from the chat box from Tanya Tarabowski from Fine.
Mhm.
And she asks a question about lobbying. She says, raising issues with government officials, is this lobbying? Is raising issues with government officials that do not involve a specific policy ask, for example, giving public testimony on an issue to inform potential legislation, participating in a listening session led by government officials, for example, MDAR staff and commissioner, are these considered lobbying activities or not?
So let's go look at the description. I would say that those count as advocacy. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so we can talk about this offline, but those to me sound like advocacy because you're not asking folks to take a specific position on a piece of legislation or like a regulation. And you're just trying to inform them to like make sure that they know about a variety of things in the field that are going on that could potentially impact potential legislation, but it's not legislation in front of them right now. So I would say that's advocacy. But we can talk about it offline, Tanya.
Becca, would it be fair to say that advocacy is when you're doing education and you're not having an ask?
Yep. So
Okay.
explaining and promoting an idea, cause, or organization. So if your like idea is, Tanya, I'm going to pick on you a little bit, farmed institution, making sure that the farmed institution sales are robust and locally sourced, because I know it's what FINE does. Promoting that idea is not lobbying, that's just advocacy.
Thank you. Any other questions? You can come off of mute if you want to ask a question.
I think Don's question somewhat got answered, but there was an earlier question asking what should we be reaching out about now? I'm going to just go back to his question. Are there bills being considered that we should be more active on right now? So
yeah, it's a great question. So right now is kind of a awkward time, like I was saying earlier. Right now we have like a month left in formal session and we're waiting for the budget conference committee report to come out. So generally from the collaborative's perspective, we send out calls to action when like things move. So once the conference committee report comes out, we will send a call to action if we need to like reach out to the governor for anything. Again, that conference committee report can't be amended, but once the budget reaches the governor, he can veto line items. So we generally send out one last call to action to ask people to reach out to him just to make sure that he doesn't reject anything that we like. And we are expecting to see some bills come up in the next 3 weeks that relate to the food system. There's a bond bill, which I didn't talk about today, but bond bills are another like form of authorizing spending specifically on capital programs that fund infrastructure, for example. Those are just authorizing the money to be spent. Those aren't actually spending the money. That comes in another like capital budget. You'll often see a discrepancy between what's authorized and what's actually spent. So one of those is being considered that should be voted on maybe next week. We're not sure yet. So we'll send out a call to action on that. And then there are a lot of like the bills that I was talking about here in our current state level policy work, and some of these other campaigns are, at varieties of points in the legislative process, or some of them are in the budget, like universal school meals. So they will send out more information on how to get involved. But I think right now it's kind of a like wait and see game, which is frustrating, but there's going to be a lot of activity in the last like 3 weeks of the formal session that we'll need folks to be ready to act on. So feel free to take a breather now and then keep an eye on your inbox for future calls to action. Sorry, that was kind of like long-winded.
That's okay, Becca. One of Viviana asked if there's a way, all those different campaigns, if you can send out an email to everybody saying this is how you sign up for all these campaigns.
Yeah, so I was going to just link them in these slides that you'll all be receiving. So yep, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you. There is also a question. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask a quick question. You talk about getting bills passed. Do you use the referendum process to get things done often?
That's a great question. We don't use the referendum process because we're a small organization. I work for the collaborative. We're 5 people. We don't have the capacity to do a ballot question. For folks who may be unfamiliar, doing a ballot question is kind of a way to like circumvent the legislature if you want to take something directly to the people, if like maybe an issue has been like languishing on Beacon Hill for a while. The most recent ballot question referendum that I remember that was on food systems was about eggs and, generally speaking, like animal confined products, that I believe passed a couple of years ago. But you will see like a couple ballot questions on your ballot this fall that are not specifically related to the food system, but are related to like funding that could potentially, be used to like fund things that relate to a robust food system. But like we generally don't, because we don't have the capacity for that. And we're pretty okay just trying to work through the legislative process right now. Sorry again, that was kind of long-winded. I hope that helped on.
Becca, Tanya has a question. Tania.
It's Tanya, thanks.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks so much. This has been really great. One more question I had was, I know your focus is on the state level, but just curious if you have suggestions for town level or town or city level advocacy too, because certainly I can think of a lot of things in terms of, land use and access and food pantries and things like that, where decisions are being made at that level too. Just curious if you have advice on that. And if there's major differences with how you would recommend doing things compared to the state level.
That's a great question. I don't think that there's generally like a big difference. I think that, the districts are a lot smaller. So either for like a city council or a town select person, you're talking about like a community level instead of like a state representative who might rep several communities. And I think that there's opportunities in most towns to like get involved with like your conservation commission, for example, that a lot of them deal with land use, or maybe the mayor's office runs the like office of food security or food access. And like, I think the way that I would like get involved with like city or town level work is like to join a food policy council. Like there are several across the state, or to help create an emerging one like the South Coast has been doing, like there is in Hampshire County. A lot of the work that Brittany does with the local food policy councils is on like municipal level policy and advocacy. I think it's really important. It's not something that like I'm focused on per se, but especially with the American Rescue Plan Act or ARPA funds that each municipality has received, I think it's a really important some like thing to keep your eye on, because that can be used to fund food pantries or like community farms or a variety of like initiatives that municipalities will run. I think there's a lot of ways to get involved that depend on your municipality, so I don't want to like generalize too much. But yeah, thanks for the question.
Nick, you had another question, Nick Owen.
Yeah, just quickly related. Firstly, thank you for this whole meeting and training and whatnot. It's been very, very informative. I was just wondering, because it's always something that I'm trying to find, if it is there, is say a consistently updated, comprehensive listing of food resources for the state, or even more the city, being based in Boston. Yeah, I just figured I would put that out there in case anyone is really familiar with something like that.
Can I ask you to define food resources?
Yes. So I would say, I guess any sort of program related to food access, whether that be a more standard food pantry, food bank, sort of mobile distribution, even related to programs like HIP and whatnot. If that exists.
Yeah, it exists in several places.
Okay.
There's a specific map that's just for HIP right now called DTA Finder. If you Google it, it'll come up. They're going to add other programs to it eventually, like the restaurant meals pilot program, I believe. There are I think Project Bread has a database for like summer meal sites. The city of Boston also generally publishes through its Office of Food Justice, publishes like maps for like farmers markets, food pantry sites. There's also the Mass Grown map, which is like broadly speaking, like farms, farmers markets, like other agricultural locations across the state, which is produced by MDAR. I think that the planning agency for like the metro region, the Metropolitan Area Policy Council, it's MAPC, I forget what their like acronym stands for exactly. They have like a food systems database that is good, but I think needs to be updated. That might have some of that information as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's unfortunately doesn't all exist in one place. But
Yeah, no, that's for sure. Thank you though. That's very, very helpful. I think actually no, there's other questions. So that's my turn.
Nick, there was a lot of chat just listed in the chat box. So to go there, and a lot of people posted resources
Great, thank you everyone.
to what's local there.
Becca, we do have another question. Does the Agricultural Equity Network have its own media or web presence?
yeah, it has a page on our website and a like listserv that Norris sends out emails to. We don't have like a social media page for it other than just like our like organizational pages on Facebook and Twitter, and we have a YouTube channel that we sometimes post to. But they have been hosting like kind of like coffee hours, so they're mostly just like online. So no social media yet, but some web presence, yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Any other areas that we didn't hit on that you want more information right now? This would be a good time to do that.
Another quick question, if you don't mind. You focused on laws. I know why you don't do referendums, but why not work on regulations?
Oh, we do submit comments to regulations. It just wasn't like the focus of this presentation as much, because there's really no good reason for that. But we have submitted comments on like regulations, especially when like it comes to implementing, say, like climate change regulations. We do submit comments to like make sure that you're including agriculture in those regulations, make sure that like that's actually well represented and it's not just like kind of an afterthought. It wasn't really like an area of focus for me in this presentation, and that was probably just an oversight on my part. Sorry about that.
Sarah, you had a question?
Hi, guys. Becca, thank you so much for this presentation. It just to ditto what a lot of other people have said is how informative it's been. I'm very active in the town that I live in here in Massachusetts, and there isn't really anything going on. And so I'm thinking, gosh, I really should start talking to the town administrator and see who handles the food, I guess, food council or whatever here in the town of Fairhaven, and maybe get some kind of discussion started as to how this can happen. Any recommendations, Becca?
I think just starting with a conversation is the right way to go about it, just to like see what's going on. Like maybe they have a council on aging. Those often have like meal programs, like Meals on Wheels or like congregate meals, to build community and like make sure that folks aren't isolated. I would start with a conversation.
Well, I'm on the Council for Disability,
Mhm.
and that's all we have, and we have nothing for them right now. So
Yeah.
that's why I'm saying this really is needed to be done here in town.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Sorry, I misunderstood. Yeah, I would say like start with a conversation and like figure out like what they need to like start doing that. Like, is it like, do we need to get funding? Do we need to like pass a local ordinance to like get that to happen? I think that there's a variety of ways that you could go about that, and start to pull together maybe some other folks either from the Commission on Persons with Disabilities or like other food pantry folks maybe in town. I think that that's a really awesome way to get involved. Yeah.
Fabulous, fabulous. Well, I'm on the right path with the South Coast Food Policy Council,
You are.
and working with them, and like I said, and pushing SNAP and HIP programs to everybody I talk to. But anyway, Becca, thank you very much for this.
Thank you for all your work, Sarah. I really appreciate it. All right.
Any other questions? Okay. Becca?
Yeah, so I think for the next 10 minutes or so, we're leaving like 5 minutes or so for announcements at the end, right, Christine? Yeah, so we're gonna do a couple of like practice activities. I know I threw like a lot of information at you all, but we want folks to like start using your brains in a different way to get you to remember what I just talked at you about. So we wanted to just practice what we learned. So we're going to do a couple different scenarios. So the first one is, imagine you're a staff member at a nonprofit social service agency, I'm so sorry, that assists folks who are food insecure with accessing public benefits and also runs a food pantry. You notice some of your clients are starting to come to the food pantry more often as their benefits are cut off when they work more hours. You want to help folks because they're members of your community, like you see them all the time, but you're unsure of what you can do for a next step. Using what you learned today, what tactics would you utilize to begin solving this problem? And again, I want to invite folks to come off mute and raise your hand. Feel free to ask questions. We're going to spend the next, like, say, 7 minutes on this. Sarah?
Well, again, it's just like what we were just talking about, is start with the local politicians and start a conversation with them. And then from there, reach out to the representatives for your area, for your town, your city, whatever, that kind of thing.
That's awesome. And what would you like, how would you start that conversation, Sarah?
That's a good question. I'll pass.
Okay. Does anyone else want to take on that question? Or feel free to offer a different tactic.
My initial, I guess, gut would be firstly to point folks to other resources that might be a good fit for them just in the immediate moment. Though then, at least maybe in the case of Boston, go to the Office for or Food Justice, start there. At least personally having a connection there, and communicated with them on multiple occasions. And then I would think that maybe work my way up from there through the governmental ladder. In that way, that would be my thought.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Kind of like a triage for a short-term approach and then a longer-term approach with your city offices and then working your way up. If you lost your volume, you are welcome to like put an answer in the chat as well. And I'm happy to read it out. Sarah?
Also, if your client has children or elderly folks at home, reach out and see if there's, like what I'm on the Council on Disabilities, or if there's programs at the schools. Also, does your community have any community gardens in the area? Maybe get a community garden started to get people to understand maybe some of the basics of agriculture and where their food comes from. Just a thought.
It's really great thoughts. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think making sure that, you know, folks know about the other resources that are available to them are really great. And I also just want to mention that this scenario is actually the basis of a case that folks are actually advocating around now. There's a piece of legislation in play that folks have been advocating for that are mainly spearheaded by the food banks. It's called, I forget the act number, but it's basically to end the cliff effect. So like when folks start receiving more than what's allowable for public benefits, they get cut off of public benefits. There's no like lessening of public benefits. So this piece of legislation would make sure that there's funding to basically like provide a step down of public benefits when folks start earning more, so that they're not punished for like moving into more economic security. So this is like a real life scenario. All right, we're gonna move on to scenario.
And the name of that is actually the end of Cliff.
It's called the Cliff Effect. I will post the like specific piece of legislation in this presentation, and once
Okay.
after this, I don't remember the bill number.
I'm taking notes on this.
I appreciate it. You don't have to take notes. I'll send this out. Don't worry. Okay, so scenario 2, have to throw in a HIP scenario here. You're a farmer that's part of the HIP program, but midway through their growing season, say July 15th for you, the HIP program runs out of money due to demand from clients, and your customers lose access to farm fresh produce. An advocacy coalition is called an emergency lobby day at the State House. You really want to go, but you're unsure about what to do. Using what you've learned today, how would you approach your state representative and senator to make the case for additional funding for this program? And I would love to hear from folks who maybe haven't spoken yet. Not to pick anyone. I just want to encourage folks to speak up if you're still in the Zoom room.
Caitlin, is that a hand raised? Caitlin Kenny?
And muted. I would probably go to my legislature and my representative and talk about how it personally affects me as a farmer. I think a lot of farmers, it's affecting their customers, but it's also affecting the farm's budget, which then affects, you know, the labor that they have hired through the season, that they've you know, planned for this money to be there and to be available to pay their staff. So it sort of affects your whole local community. So I would go from that angle.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Caitlin. Calling your rep's office. Yep, that's a great one. I would also say that for this one, I would remember data plus your personal story equals your maximal impact. So hopefully you have some data on how this is affecting your sales, how it affects your labor costs, that you can share, plus your personal stories of, like, you know, how you interact with customers at the market, what they tell you, what you've heard from them, and sharing that with legislators has been really powerful. And then our practice activity 3, you are a resident of a community with few healthy, affordable food stores. Unfortunately, many of your neighbors have to take the bus or travel in their cars for long distances to shop at an affordable grocery store or shop at the local corner store without many fresh, affordable options. Using what you learned today, what tactics would you utilize to begin to solve this problem? And again, would love to hear from folks who maybe haven't spoken up yet. This isn't a trick question. I promise there's no wrong answers. Just feel free to like brainstorm out loud. Julia?
Julia.
Yeah, so I am at the ABCD in the North End, and this happened way before I got here, but there was no affordable supermarket in the North End or West End neighborhood. So they got a task force or a group together and kind of advocated for, one, the opening of an affordable supermarket, and then 2, in the meantime, they also advocated for a shuttle bus that took residents of the North End and West End to supermarkets outside of the city. So that is something you could do. And then recently the Star Market opened up right near TD Garden, which is something that they had been working on for a while, and it finally happened a few years ago.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing your story.
Thank you, Julia. And Elizabeth, also from ABCD, which you guys, what's the acronym stand for?
Action for Boston Community Development.
Beautiful. Elizabeth says, perhaps reach out to an organization like Fresh Truck and see if they could come to your community.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for the suggestion. All right. Thanks so much, ABCD folks. I appreciate you all being here. It's really great to hear from the organization in Boston that does so much good work. This is also the basis for the food trust campaign that I talked about earlier. There are a lack of healthy, affordable food stores in many communities across the state. And one way that some advocates at the Mass Public Health Association and like some financial lending institutions went about solving this problem was to identify those locations using the USDA food desert map, which is publicly available online, and propose a fund that could fund new capital. That would be a capital fund to either like renovate existing stores to help them provide a wider array of healthy foods, or build new stores or like mobile markets in communities with low access. I will say that like just plopping in a store doesn't necessarily like solve the access problem. You need to make sure that folks can also afford that food. But that's one way that folks have been going about this issue in our state. So real life case scenarios. All right, thanks everyone for practicing some of what we learned today together. I really appreciate it. I think it's really helpful to like try and think through some real life problems, so I'm not just talking at you, so you like remember more of what we talked about today. And again, thank you so much to Liz and Christine for letting me take over this meeting and present to you all. I really appreciate the time, and I'm going to hand it back to Christine for some announcements.
Thank you, Becca, and thank you all for attending. So what we just have a few announcements. One is that we invite you to the 2022 Food Summit in September. And for our area, we're calling it the intersection of food and basic needs such as healthcare, housing, and transportation. So I'm going to put the save the date flyer in here, and it's a hybrid event. So it'll be both online and in person at UMass Dartmouth. So I will share that. And then Becca also has an event coming up with the Massachusetts Food System Collaborative that I invite her to share as well.
Thanks. Oh, shout out to the city of Somerville. I am personally biased because that's where I live. Yeah, so we have a forum that's also coming up in October, specifically October 12th in Sturbridge, Massachusetts. It's down off the pike. We have usually held this annually in person, but due to the pandemic for the last 2 years, it's been virtual. So we're really excited that this is going to be in person in Sturbridge this year. So we are going to be celebrating the innovative work and positive changes that have occurred in the food system, despite many challenges over the last several years since the completion of our action plan in 2015, which is officially a state plan document. It's not just like something that we wrote. And we'll also work together to develop and refine proposals for policy change and systems change that we'd like to see, and create plans to move those forward. So basically we want folks to be able to meet or re-meet, re-engage, help folks build strong working relationships, discuss topics that include equity, agriculture, food access, and the supply chain. So right now we're just asking folks to mark their calendars, and we'll have more information and registration details in August. So thanks, y'all.
Yeah, and I just have one more. We have a candidate forum for folks living in District 7, 8, 9, 10 in Bristol. We're going to have a candidate forum in October, so more details to come. But we will be working with Becca with the Massachusetts Food System Collaborative to put that on. So that is it for our announcements. Thank you all so much for coming and enjoying this time together in this training. We will send out the recording, the notes, and the PowerPoint to all of you, and you're welcome to share it with your network. We're going to put it on our YouTube channel so that it can be shared out as well. Liz, do you want to say anything?
Nope. Thank you all for coming and participating and hanging in there for the full hour and a half. We really appreciate your time and commitment to this. I did earlier in the, apparently I do have something to say. Earlier in the chat log, I put a link to our website, to the SFPC website, the South Coast Food Policy Council. Those of you that are in our region and want to be on our South Coast Food Alert listserv, please register for that. And by virtue of joining this event today, you will automatically be added to our SFPC members at large email list. And so that is the email list that we use for our advocacy campaigns. So we will, we post things on there. So we hope that you'll work with us and follow us on that as well. But thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and appreciate all the different representation from around Boston area too. So shout out to you all. Thank you.
And thanks again, Becca. We appreciate great training. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, anytime. Feel free to email me anytime with any advocacy questions. So thanks so much for having me here. I appreciate it, y'all.
You're welcome.
Becca, that was great. Thank you. Thank you all. Have a great weekend.